The industrial fans roared, pushing freezing air against the back of my neck. I kept my head tucked between my knees, convinced the heavy metal door had closed. Convinced I was finally alone in the shadows of the crates. But when I lifted my eyes, the space directly above me wasn't empty. He was just standing there, grinning down at me in the freezing dark. The air in my lungs turned to solid ice. I'm Chloe. Back when 24-hour big box stores were still a thing, I worked the graveyard shift, 10 at night until 7 in the morning at a sprawling supercenter just outside of a rural outpost called Oakhaven. It was massive, and at 3 in the morning, it felt less like a store and more like an empty concrete ocean. Aside from a cashier up front and a couple of invisible stalkers buried in the aisles, the place belonged to the silence. Customers rarely drifted in this deep into the country. It was just me, the harsh fluorescent lights, and the endless rows of merchandise. My shift started in menswear. I was folding denim, letting my mind wander into the monotonous rhythm of the work. It was approaching midnight. A man appeared at the edge of the display. He was dressed neatly, a pressed dark jacket, immaculate hair. He smelled faintly of sterile wintergreen mints and something sharp, like old pennies. He politely asked if we kept any extra stock of a specific waist size in the back. His voice was completely measured, almost perfectly flat. I kept my focus on the clothes, telling him that what we had on the rack was all that was left. He thanked me. It was entirely mundane. But when he stepped forward to hang the jeans back up, our eyes met. He didn't blink. He just stared. It lingered for a second too long. A heavy, calculating gaze that made the hairs on my forearms rise. I watched his silhouette fade into the main aisle. Time slipped by. The store emptied out entirely, becoming a ghost town of polished linoleum and humming lights. Around 1 in the morning, I dragged a heavy rolling cart over to the appliance department. I was unboxing coffee makers, working on autopilot. The shelves in this section were bare wire backing, creating a grid of diamond-shaped windows into the next aisle over. I reached for another box, but my hand froze in midair. Through the wire grid, a figure was standing completely still, watching me. The moment I stopped moving, he turned his head away, but the profile was unmistakable. It was the Wintergreen Man. From an hour and a half ago, I kept my breathing shallow, casually pushing my cart toward the end of the aisle to get a better look. I peeked around the end cap. He was slowly walking away, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. They were completely empty. Who wanders a deserted supercenter for nearly 2 hours without picking up a single item? Why was he standing so perfectly motionless in the dark? My throat suddenly felt completely dry. I abandoned the cart. I walked briskly toward the back warehouse, glancing over my shoulder every few feet. I locked myself in the employee break room, sinking into a worn couch. I stared at my phone screen, trying to make the slight tremor in my fingers stop. Was my mind playing tricks on me in the early morning hours? When I finally forced myself to stand back up, I decided I needed to be somewhere enclosed, somewhere separated from the massive open floor plan. I went to the dairy cooler. It was an employees-only zone, hidden behind heavy steel doors. Inside, it was a sensory deprivation chamber of freezing temperatures and noise. I started loading heavy plastic crates of milk onto the racks, checking the expiration dates, letting the physical labor ground me. The sheer volume of the refrigeration units drowned out the rest of the world. Then, the air pressure in the room shifted. The thick door swung open. I instinctively ducked, peering through a narrow gap between two stacked pallets of freight. A man in a dark jacket stepped into the harsh, blinding light of the cooler. It was him. He was in an employee-only area. My vision tunneled. I dropped silently to my knees, sliding behind a towering stack of cardboard egg cartons. I curled into a tight ball, pressing my forehead against my knees, staring at the filthy concrete floor. I strained to listen, but the roaring fans masked everything. I had no idea where he was in the room. I just waited. The sound was incredibly close, just on the other side of the cardboard. I held my breath until my ribs ached. The seconds stretched into agonizing, suffocating hours. Finally, the squeaking stopped. The shadows on the floor shifted. I assumed he had given up. I assumed he had walked out. I slowly lifted my head. He was leaning entirely over the boxes, looking straight down at me. His lips were curled into a wide, unnatural smile. A smile that bared his teeth, but left his eyes completely dead. The moment my mouth opened to scream, the smile vanished. His face dropped into flat, chilling hostility. He lunged downward, a gloved hand reaching out to clamp violently over my mouth. The suffocating scent of wintergreen and copper flooded my nose. Survival instinct took over. I shoved both of my hands into the massive stack of cartons, pushing the entire pallet directly into his chest. Dozens of cartons collapsed. Yolks and plastic shattered across his heavy boots. He stumbled backward, his arms flailing for balance. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted blindly. I threw my body against the swinging doors, bursting out of the freezing dark and into the bright, empty aisles of the main store. I ran until my lungs burned, nearly colliding with a night manager named Marcus near the front registers. I grabbed his arm, my chest heaving, pointing frantically toward the back of the store. I couldn't even form the words. Before I could speak, calm, measured footsteps echoed from the main corridor. It was him. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He casually smoothed the front of his jacket, walking directly up to us. He extended a firm hand to Marcus. He introduced himself as Arthur, a regional director from corporate, conducting a surprise overnight inspection. His voice was dripping with professional authority. He turned to Marcus, expressing mild, patronizing concern. He claimed he was merely checking the temperature logs in the back cooler and had accidentally startled me. He apologized for spooking me, casually adding that he was just making sure the night crew wasn't slacking off in the back rooms. Marcus nodded vigorously, eager to please a sudden figure of authority. He swallowed the lie completely. I looked at Marcus, silently begging him to see through it, to see the yoke on the man's boots, to see the deadness in his eyes. But Marcus just turned to me and suggested I get back to the floor to finish up the appliances. I turned to the man. My voice was barely a whisper. I asked him why he reached for my face, why he tried to cover my mouth. Arthur smiled, a tight, authoritative line. "I was just trying to keep you from making a scene over nothing, young lady." He turned his back on us. I watched him walk away, his posture perfect, heading toward the front exit. The next morning, the sun was shining through the glass windows of the store director's office. I sat across from Evelyn, the head manager, and asked her about Arthur from corporate. Evelyn's brow furrowed.
She pulled up the regional schedule on her monitor. There was no Arthur. There was no surprise inspection. Corporate directors do not visit rural outposts at 2 in the morning. The color drained from Evelyn's face. She immediately pulled up the overnight security footage. We sat in total silence as the grainy black and white feed revealed the truth. He hadn't just stumbled upon me in the aisles. He hadn't just wandered into the back. The cameras showed him pacing exactly 3 aisles behind me, for hours, matching my steps, stopping the exact moment I stopped, slipping into my blind spots every time I turned his head. He had tracked me from menswear to appliances to the break room door. He was a predator, and he knew exactly how to use the mask of polite authority to make my screams look like a lack of professionalism. A police report was filed, but the man was never identified. He drove off into the absolute darkness of the Alabama backroads, leaving nothing behind but an empty store and hours of footage. I stepped down from the night shift that very morning. I still work there occasionally, strictly in the daylight, surrounded by crowds, surrounded by noise. But sometimes, when a customer approaches me, standing just a little too still, speaking with a voice that is just a little too calm, I can still smell wintergreen in the air.
The brass ring of the peephole pressed like a coin of ice against my eyebrow. A metallic taste, sharp and bitter, flooded the back of my mouth. Standing on our front stoop, bathed in the sickly, shifting amber glow of the porch light, was him. The same man from the electronics aisle. He wasn't moving. He was just staring at the heavy oak wood, waiting. Let's take a step back. It was the Thursday night right before Black Friday. The quiet hours before the holiday storm. At 11 o'clock at night, retail stores take on a strange, almost liminal energy. The aisles feel too wide. The air feels too still. I was there for one specific thing, a promotional laptop that had gone on sale early. I navigated the sterile white aisles until I found the electronics section. There it was. Only one box left, tucked onto the bottom shelf. As my fingers brushed the cold cardboard, another hand reached down. A massive, calloused hand. I instinctively pulled back. I looked up to see a towering man dressed in a heavy, faded canvas jacket. But his face was remarkably soft, apologetic even. He offered a warm, polite smile, stepping back to give me space. "My apologies, friend," he muttered, his voice calm, steady, and respectful. "I didn't mean to crowd you. Been looking for this exact model all week." I smiled back, feeling the immediate tension leave my shoulders. He just seemed like an exhausted guy running a late-night errand. "Ah, you're a lucky guy," he said gently, gesturing to the box I had just pulled against my chest. "Last one on the floor?" I nodded, feeling a brief pang of sympathy. I told him that I thought it was. Then the mask slipped. His polite smile didn't fade, but it froze. The warmth entirely vanished from his eyes, replaced by a flat, unblinking deadness. His gaze dropped to the box, then slowly locked back onto my face. A sour chemical odor suddenly drifted off his coat. It smelled like old copper and damp, rotting earth. "I need that one," he said. The softness in his voice was completely gone. It was a hollow, heavy demand. My breath tightened. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice wavering. "I was just checking out." He didn't yell. He didn't make wild gestures.
He just took half a step forward, invading that unspoken bubble of personal space, and whispered that I was going to hand it over. My pulse hammered violently against my ribs. I turned away and walked fast. I made it to the front registers, my hands gripping the cardboard box so tightly my knuckles ached. I glanced over my shoulder. He was standing at the very end of the main aisle, just watching me. I turned to the middle-aged woman behind me in the checkout line. I whispered to her, my throat paper dry, that the man by the electronics was following me over a laptop. She briefly glanced back, then let out a soft, dismissive chuckle. She told me it was just the holidays, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. She assured me the stores were full of weirdos this time of year, and told me to just ignore him. I looked at the young cashier scanning my item. He didn't even look up. He was completely detached from my reality. I was entirely on my own.
I drove home, taking the long way through the winding streets of our gated community. Wide, empty roads, long, sweeping driveways. It was supposed to be safe. My family was already asleep. My father, Arthur, was out of town on business, leaving just my mother, Eleanor, my younger sister Maya, and me in the house. The living room was a tomb of silence. I needed to clear my head, so I took the unopened box out to the back patio by the pool to set it up. The freezing night air felt good against my skin. I sat down at the patio table. The night insects, which usually provided a steady wall of white noise, had completely stopped chirping. A dead, suffocating silence hung over the yard. Then, the motion sensor light on the side of the house violently clicked on. A blinding flood of white light illuminated the edge of the woods bordering our property. I froze in my chair. We lived next to a small patch of forest. Raccoons and stray cats tripped that sensor all the time, but the heavy silence in the air felt deeply wrong. I didn't wait to find out why. I gathered my things, stepped quickly back inside, and pushed the heavy glass door shut. I settled onto the living room sofa, trying to shake the lingering paranoia. 10 minutes passed. Then, the quiet night split wide open. It was my Cadillac, parked right in our driveway. The alarm was screaming, sending rhythmic shocks of noise through the walls of the house. I ran upstairs, grabbed my keys from my nightstand, and pressed the panic button for my bedroom window. Nothing happened. The signal couldn't reach through the thick glass and distance. I hurried back downstairs. The neighborhood dogs, who usually barked at the slightest breeze, were completely silent. I opened the front door just a crack and stepped out onto the freezing stoop. I aimed the fob toward the driveway. The alarm instantly died. The sudden quiet that followed was deafening. And that's when I saw it. Parked out on the street, directly at the end of our driveway, was a dark, beaten-up sedan. It hadn't been there when I pulled in. In our neighborhood, street parking at midnight simply didn't happen. A thin trail of white exhaust curled up into the freezing air. The engine was off, but the metal was still hot. Through the glare of the distant street lamp, I could clearly see the silhouette of a large head in the driver's seat. A cold sweat broke across the back of my neck. I slipped back inside and quietly engaged the deadbolt. I moved up the stairs to my mother's room, waking Eleanor with a gentle shake. I whispered that someone was outside and that I didn't think we were safe. She hurried downstairs with me, pulling her robe tight against her chest. She leaned into the front door, pressing her eye to the peephole. I watched her shoulders physically drop. She sucked in a sharp, trembling breath and quickly covered her mouth with both of her hands. She stepped away, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. I took her place against the wood. I looked through the distorted glass lens.
and I saw the massive, canvas-clad shoulders of the man from Walmart. He was looking directly into the lens, as if he could see my eye on the other side. A shadow eclipsed the thin sliver of light under the front door, blocking out the cold wind. Then, the brass handle slowly began to turn, left, then right, testing the lock. When the door didn't give, the turning stopped. The entire door frame rattled under the immense weight of his fists. A thin layer of dust drifted down from the ceiling hinges. Eleanor let out a stifled, broken sob. Footsteps hurried down the carpeted stairs. My sister Maya stopped dead on the bottom step, her face draining of color as she realized what was trying to get inside. Then, the pounding stopped. Just stopped. The silence that followed was agonizing.
Eleanor was already retreating to the kitchen, whispering frantically to a 911 dispatcher. Minutes stretched into an eternity. We were trapped in a holding pattern of pure dread. A sudden, unnatural draft of freezing air swept over the hardwood floor beneath my bare feet. Then, from the den at the back of the house, a violent, concussive crash shook the floorboards. Maya shrieked. I shoved them both toward the staircase, ordering them to run up and lock the master bedroom door. I sprinted toward the hallway that led to the den. I grabbed the heavy door handle, pulled the den door shut, and locked it from the outside. I slowly backed away, my eyes fixed on the painted wood. I waited for the door to splinter. I waited for him to burst through the frame. My lungs burned. I hadn't taken a breath in nearly a minute. I could hear the heavy crunch of boots stepping on broken glass on the other side of the wall. Suddenly, bright flashes of red and blue painted the front living room windows. The response time was miraculously fast. I threw open the front door and waved the officers inside, pointing frantically toward the locked den. They breached the room with weapons drawn. They found him, wedged into the dark corner behind our leather sofa. He was completely covered in dirt and shivering, clutching a jagged piece of the broken window pane. He didn't fight the police, but as they dragged him out into the hallway in handcuffs, his dead eyes found mine. He started screaming, vile, deranged threats, words that made the hair on my arms stand up. He promised he would come back. He promised he would finish what he started at the store. The officers pulled him out into the freezing night. One of them lingered behind, assuring us that the man was heavily under the influence of narcotics. He patted my shoulder and told me to get a good night's rest, promising the guy wouldn't be bothering us again. Get a good night's rest. As if the absolute sanctuary of our home hadn't just been violently ripped open. It's easy to walk through those brightly lit aisles and mock the strange things you see. We watch people. We laugh. We assume they go back to their own separate, harmless worlds when the automatic sliding doors close behind them. But sometimes, they don't. Sometimes you catch the eye of the wrong person. And sometimes, they follow you into the dark.